An old man walked into a high-end fashion store, only to be ignored and mocked as a nobody. 40 minutes of humiliation until a powerful man pushed through the door, leaving the arrogant staff stunned. Who was this old man? And what made that store pay the price? Listen to a story of honor, loyalty, and a slap of justice for the shallow. Under the gentle noon sun of an autumn day in Missoula's outskirts, Montana, oak-lined streets led to a bustling district where Laurent's boutique stood out, its gleaming glass facade showcasing suits like works of art. Soft, classical music drifted from within, mingling with the slow steps of Howard Kent, a 75-year-old man, as he entered the store. His white shirt, though old, was neatly pressed, hugging a frail but still rugged frame, a remnant of his days as a Marine communications officer. His black leather shoes, polished that morning in his small wooden home's kitchen, clicked evenly on the marble floor. In his hand, he held a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes on suit sizes and preferences for his granddaughter, Emily, who was soon to be married. Howard had served in Vietnam, maintaining vital communications between units, ensuring no signal was lost. After his wife's passing, he lived alone, fixing old radios and helping young veterans with benefits claims. But today, he came with a sacred purpose to choose a new suit for Emily's wedding, the only granddaughter who called him her silent hero. He pushed open the heavy glass door, stepping into the opulent world of Laurent's boutique, where the scent of high-end cologne and the glow of crystal chandeliers felt alien to his simple wooden home. The store's patrons, men in sleek suits, women adorned with sparkling jewelry, glanced at him, then quickly looked away as if he were a fleeting shadow. Howard stood quietly, his deep eyes scanning racks of suits, his hand gently opening the notebook to check Emily's notes. A faint smile crossed his face, picturing her, the moment he'd stand by her on her big day. But within him, memories of Vietnam, of long nights relaying signals under enemy fire, smoldered, a flame that never died. The air in Laurent's boutique, with its sparkling crystal chandeliers and soft classical music, turned cold for Howard Kent. The 75-year-old man stood quietly near a rack of suits, his worn leather notebook clutched tightly, his deep eyes scanning the finely tailored garments. His crisp white shirt and polished black shoes, though neat, seemed insufficient to catch the attention of the staff in this high-end store. Howard waited patiently, thinking of his granddaughter Emily, her radiant smile when she called him her silent hero, and the moment he'd stand by her at her wedding. But 40 minutes passed, and not a single employee approached. The young staff, dressed in sleek black suits, glided past him, their glances brief before turning away as if he were invisible. A female attendant, her blonde hair tied high, flashed a forced smile and approached. But instead of asking what he needed, she said coldly, "Sir, this is a luxury store. If you're just browsing, perhaps try another section." Her tone was sharp, laced with implication, prompting smirks from nearby customers. Howard didn't reply, only nodded, his eyes calm, as they'd been during long nights relaying signals in Vietnam's battlefields. He sat on a velvet chair nearby, the notebook resting on his lap, his hand gently tracing an old photo in his wallet, a faded image of him with his former commander, Colonel Thomas Dent, inscribed with a handwritten note. No voice forgotten, no signal lost. But his patience seemed to only irritate the staff. In a far corner, 2 employees whispered loudly enough for him to hear, probably just here for the air conditioning. Look at him, clutching that notebook like he's pricing stuff. Their giggles cut like a knife, drawing curious, mocking glances from other customers. The store manager, a middle-aged man in an expensive gray suit, stood behind the counter, pretending to be busy with his computer. But his eyes flicked over Howard, radiating indifference. The store's air grew stifling, as if Howard, with all his silent sacrifices in Vietnam, were a stranger in this lavish world. He sat there, quiet, not angry, not arguing, but within him. Memories of keeping vital communications alive under enemy fire stirred not for revenge, but to remind him that honor doesn't need to shout to be recognized. 40 minutes, a brief moment in his life, but enough to expose the shallowness of those around him. The air in Laurent's boutique grew stifling, as if the indifference and mockery aimed at Howard Kent had drained the warmth from the lavish space. Howard, 75, sat quietly on a velvet chair, his worn leather notebook resting on his lap, his deep eyes fixed on the marble floor, as if recalling long nights relaying signals under enemy fire in Vietnam. His crisp white shirt and polished black shoes couldn't mask his isolation in this high-end store, where crystal chandeliers and classical music seemed reserved for flashier patrons. The staff, in sleek black suits with forced smiles, glided past him, their glances dripping with dismissal as if he were a ghost. The blonde attendant, who'd coldly told him this was a luxury store, now fussed over a customer in a gray suit, her eyes never turning his way. Two employees in a far corner whispered, their giggles sharp as knives, drawing smirks from other customers. The store manager, in an expensive gray suit, stood behind the counter, his gaze flicking over Howard with clear apathy. Howard remained patient, his hand gently tracing an old photo in his wallet, a faded shot of him with his former commander, Colonel Thomas Dent, inscribed "No voice forgotten, no signal lost." He thought of Emily, his granddaughter, her radiant smile, the reason he'd come to choose a suit for her wedding. But 40 minutes of waiting met only with scorn and neglect had touched an invisible line. Suddenly, the heavy glass door of Laurent's boutique swung open, a cool breeze sweeping in with a commanding figure. A distinguished man strode inside, his tailored navy suit hugging a sturdy frame, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his piercing eyes cutting through the room. It was Colonel Thomas Dent, Howard's old commander in Vietnam, now CEO of a national fashion chain. The store fell silent. Every eye from customers to staff locked on him. Thomas paused, his gaze sweeping the room, then halting on Howard, seated quietly on the velvet chair. A warm smile spread across his face, his voice deep, resonant. "Good heavens, you're a hard man to track down. Sergeant Kent." The store froze. The blonde attendant dropped her notepad, her face paling. The manager rushed from behind the counter, stammering, "Mr. Dent, sir, we didn't know." But Thomas cut him off, his eyes sharpening, his voice cold as steel. "The problem is, you never asked who he was." The air in Laurent's boutique turned to ice, as if the world itself held its breath. The air in Laurent's boutique froze, as if time itself had stopped before Colonel Thomas Dent's presence. The man in a tailored navy suit, his piercing eyes commanding, stood in the store's center, a small Marine Corps pin on his lapel gleaming like a silent declaration. Howard Kent, 75, sat quietly on the velvet chair, his worn leather notebook on his lap, his deep eyes steady, as they'd been during fierce nights relaying signals in Vietnam. The staff, who'd ignored and mocked him, stood rooted, their nervous glances darting from the blonde attendant to the manager in his expensive gray suit. Customers, clutching designer bags and sparkling jewelry, fell silent, their eyes fixed on Thomas and Howard, sensing a wave about to crash. Thomas stepped toward Howard, his gaze softening, but his voice carried the weight of a battlefield commander. "Sergeant Kent, I've been searching for you to invite you to our unit's anniversary. You haven't changed, still quiet, still patient, just like at Khe Sanh." Howard smiled faintly, his voice warm, low. "Just here to pick a suit for my granddaughter. Colonel, didn't mean to trouble you." Thomas shook his head, his eyes sweeping the store, locking on the blonde attendant, who bowed her head, and the manager, stammering excuses. "Mr. Dent, we didn't know, we thought," but Thomas cut him off, his voice cold as steel. "You thought he didn't belong here. You thought a man like him wasn't worth serving. You were wrong." He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and spoke curtly. "Send the team to Laurent's boutique, Missoula, now." The store fell deathly quiet, the classical music now a hollow echo. 20 minutes later, the glass door swung open again, and two men in black suits entered, their steps brisk, carrying briefcases embossed with the logo of a national fashion conglomerate. They were board representatives, their presence turning the manager's face ashen. Thomas faced the crowd, his voice steady, not loud, but searing into every soul, effective immediately. I'm acquiring all shares of Laurent's boutique. From today, this store will operate under a new principle: no one is ignored, and no one is judged by appearances. And Howard Kent, who kept vital communications alive in war, who ensured no signal was lost, will choose any suit he wants, free of charge, because a man of honor deserves respect. The store stood stunned. The blonde attendant lowered her head, her hands trembling. The manager stepped back, his lips moving, but no words escaping. Customers, who'd once smirked at Howard, froze, their eyes betraying shame. Howard, still seated, nodded slightly, his gaze not triumphant, but calm, as if used to honor being restored through deeds, not words. The seismic shift, unforeseen, had changed Laurent's boutique forever, and Howard Kent's story was only beginning to spread. The silence now carried a different weight, no longer born of apathy or mockery, but of profound respect, as if the entire space bowed before Howard Kent's story. Colonel Thomas Dent stood in the store's center, his sharp yet warm eyes fixed on the scene, having just declared the acquisition of Laurent's boutique and a new principle no one ignored, no one judged by appearances. Howard, 75, sat on the velvet chair, his worn leather notebook on his lap, his deep eyes free of triumph. Only the calm of a man who'd kept vital communications alive under Vietnam's gunfire. The staff from the blonde attendant who'd coldly dismissed him to the manager in his pricey gray suit stood with bowed heads, their faces flushed with shame and unease. Customers, clutching designer bags and glittering jewelry, fell quiet, their gazes shifting from Thomas to Howard as if seeing the humble man's immeasurable legacy for the first time. Thomas stepped forward, placing a hand on Howard's shoulder, his voice warm, reverent. "Sergeant Kent, pick any suit, and we'll have it ready. This isn't just a gift for your granddaughter's wedding. It's a statement that your honor will always be upheld." Howard smiled faintly, his eyes scanning the racks, settling on a navy suit, simple yet refined, like himself. Just this one, Colonel. Enough to stand by Emily, the staff. Now, Bugan Daiman hurried to bring the suit to the fitting room, their eyes no longer haughty but awkward, respectful. When Howard emerged, the suit fitting perfectly, his white shirt and polished shoes blending with the dignity of a former communications officer, the store fell silent. Then, a spontaneous applause broke out from a few customers, rippling through the space. Howard nodded, his gaze meeting Thomas's, a wordless thank you. As he left, the entire staff lined up in 2 rows, bowing in a gesture never seen at Laurent's boutique. The blonde attendant, face flushed, whispered, "We're sorry, sir." Howard only smiled, his voice low. "It's all right, miss. Just remember, everyone has a story." A week later, the store transformed. A new sign rose, inscribed Kent and Dent Tailors, where every stitch carries a story of honor. In the fitting room, a small plaque appeared, gold ink on wood. "Never judge a person by their appearance." Laurent's boutique, once a symbol of cold luxury, became a place of loyalty and respect, thanks to a quiet man and an unforgettable lesson. Howard's story spread through Missoula, from oak-lined streets to wooden homes, reminding all that honor lies not in appearances, but in what a person has sacrificed and given. Howard Kent's story burns on, a flame of honor that never fades. From an old man ignored, he became a symbol of loyalty, teaching the world that appearances don't tell the true tale. Colonel Dent and a lesson in justice changed the store forever. If this story stirs your heart, share it to spread that flame far. And don't forget to subscribe to the Silent Valor Stories YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join us in keeping stories like Howard's alive forever.